The future of international education will not be judged solely by the number of students we enrol, but how well those students succeed in their studies, their careers, and their lives. Trust is the foundation for that success.
G'day and welcome to Global Horizons. I'm Rob Malicki, coming today from Garigal Land in Sydney.
And g'day, I'm Dirk Mulder, the founder and CEO of the Koala News. I'm coming to you from a little bit west of Gadigal country. I'm in Dirk country in the west of Sydney.
It's good to see the sun shining again, Dirk. It was getting a little bit grim here in Sydney for a little while there.
Mate, it sure was. I think reports say the wettest August I saw in 27 years, and August hadn't finished yet. So I'm sure it's getting up there for being one of the wettest on record.
Bloody, it felt like it too. As people might know, I'm a bit of a trail runner, and there is water in places that I have never seen it before. Like places that normally drain in 15 seconds are just inundated out there on the trails.
Yeah, I actually went into town, I think it was last Thursday night, for a function and jumped on the train here at Penrith. And mate, there's this kind of building lot that's vacant next to the railway station on the north side. It was almost completely underwater. It was amazing.
Was that the Language Cert event that you went to?
It was, yeah, exactly.
Tell us about that, mate. I mean, we had the gents from Language Cert on the last podcast. Yeah, tell us about the event. How'd it go?
No, it's really, great, as you would expect. You know, Language Cert are obviously doing the rounds of the country at the moment, or certainly the East Coast. Got an expert over from Athens. Now, I'm going to mess her name up, I am sure, but Leda Lendopoulos, I want to say. Sorry, Leda, if you're listening. But yeah, great. I mean, it was great. It was, not too long, just enough to talk through, I guess, how the test came to get onto the deed, but then also some of the background stuff that obviously they've had to work, and the concordance studies, etc. And yeah, really informative, and obviously topped by a nice glass of wine and a cheeky little chicken slider.
Mate, talking about glasses of wine, since the last time I saw you, I was down in Hobart for the IEAA Learning Abroad Forum, and there may or may not have been one or more glasses of wine consumed down there.
Really? That's amazing. I hope it was a nice Tassie Pinot too.
Tasmania. What can I say? Like, just such an amazing destination. And we just had perfect blue sky days. In fact, I had this morning, I got up to go up to the top of Mt Wellington to watch the sunrise. And normally, that kind of sunrise from that kind of destination is just always crammed full of backpackers and tourists. But the road was closed about halfway up because of the risk of ice. I was trail running, so it didn't make any difference to me. I kind of ran up the last sort of 500 vertical meters and got up to the summit, and it was just this crystal clear, perfect sunrise, and there was not a soul around. It was one of those pinch me moments of just like, God, that was awesome.
Mate, I don't mind saying I had a bit of envy. I think I saw those photos on Facebook or LinkedIn or one of the social networks. Ironically, I've only been to Tasmania once, and when I was there, similar thing happened. Mount Wellington was closed, so we had to turn around and go back. We were rather disappointed, so I could only imagine what it was like up there, particularly, as you say, with having a moment of solitude or without all the spectators around. Would have been amazing.
It was so cold. Like, the kind of Antarctic wind blowing. It's like perfect, picture perfect. You don't see it in the photographs, but it was so cold that I was saying to myself, God, I can't stay too long, because like there literally gets to that risk point where you turn an ankle or something like that, and you could get yourself into some pretty serious strife.
Well, that's right. I remember when I was there, I think is it the Australis, the icebreaker? That was docked in the port. So it just kind of re-emphasises that whole cold feeling when you've got an icebreaker that you're looking at as well.
Yeah, look, I was just massively impressed by Uni of Tas. Like some of the new spaces that they're developing both in Hobart and up in Launceston are world class. Literally walk around and...
I was going to say, we spoke offline about, I think the move from, certainly, the move away from, for the want of a better word, metropolitan campuses and into the city. And I remember you saying just how amazing the space is there. So it's good on the University of Tasmania.
And the other side of things, like the Learning Abroad Forum, hosted by Uni of Tassie, it was hosted in one of the hotels downtown, but the UTAS Learning Abroad team obviously pulled off a pretty big effort to help pull that together. Another really, really good event. I mean, just such a great reminder of why our industry is so awesome, the collaboration, the discussion, lots of changes going on in the learning abroad space right now. Particularly, New Colombo Plan is the massive one. For those people who aren't familiar, the New Colombo Plan is an Australian government program funded by DFAT, $50 million a year in scholarships to help students to have international study experiences in the Indo-Pacific. Phenomenal scheme, but there's a big shift on at the moment to move away from the sort of shorter term period programs towards longer experiences. So that's students getting out on a semester program, which is like the new centerpiece piece of the NCP, as well as the scholarship program, which is their flagship up to 19-month experience worth over $100,000 or up to over $100,000. And so, yeah, big changes sort of afoot in that space. So a lot of good discussion down there amongst institutions about how they're adapting to that. Fantastic data out by Kerry Ramirez talking about the recovery of learning abroad. So that's funded by the Australian Uni International Directors Forum, the AUIDF.
Good on them.
Yeah, great study going back now over 20 years, started by Alan Olson, the legend himself.
Mate, I think I was on the AUIDF when we made the decision to extend it to learning abroad. It takes me back.
That's like early 2000s, man. Yeah.
Incredible.
Tells our vintage, mate.
Absolutely. Sure does.
If you got a bottle of wine from back then, man, it's worth a lot of money these days.
Yeah. The problem with me is it'd be sitting in the warm weather somewhere and you'd pop it and it wouldn't be any good.
You're like, what's that smell?
Exactly. The essence of vinegar is beautiful.
Yeah, so numbers continue to rebound. That was sort of the good news story. Obviously, COVID had a massive impact on the number of Australian students' outbound experiences. That number is continuing to recover. And then Brad Doherty from CIS Australia has been doing this longitudinal study since COVID, looking at attitudes inside international offices and amongst universities. And he's sort of doing the horizon scanning side of learning abroad, looking at what people are thinking and feeling about the years ahead. And people are predicting that numbers will continue to move forward. But it's pretty clear that learning abroad teams are under pressure there, with their resourcing, with the manual workloads. Learning abroad is still incredibly manual.
And not without global challenges, right? Like, who can predict what's going to happen in the United States over the next 12 months?
Yeah, it's really getting pinchy out there. Yeah, so interesting times in the learning abroad space, and that remains an awesome event. And in fact, what I'll do at the end of our little discussion, Dirk, I did grab a couple of audio clips from some of the delegates at the Learning Abroad Forum. So stick around to the end if you're a learning abroad specialist. You want to hear from some of your colleagues out there, hear their views on how the event went and what we learned. So, mate, that's a fair bit from my camp. Let's get to your article that you put out. Was that earlier this week? Or no, end of last week?
End of last week, yeah.
A brilliant bit of writing and a really great analysis about this kind of ongoing rhetoric that we're getting from the Australian government that kind of makes universities look a bit like the enemy of the people. Do you want to talk to this?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Oh, look, I'm kind of, looking behind the curtain in a moment, I guess. One of the things when you write about this stuff kind of day in, day out, there's certain things that, there's trends and patterns that you see. But I've got to say, during kind of over the last 18 months, it's been depressing at times. We've spoken about that. And one of the things I think I've learnt from this time is you don't just take things on face value. So we've learnt, we've seen as a sector, that international students caused the housing crisis. And we saw that turned on its head. That wasn't the case at all. And we've seen a whole bunch of other things that the government have rolled out. The ghost colleges, for instance. They weren't ghost colleges at all. And, Tracy Harris fact-checked that one. And so I guess I'm picking up on the intensity, if I can use that word, of the government at almost every opportunity, what it seems now, using words like chonks, crooks and integrity. And I haven't seen any new evidence. And when I say new evidence, I haven't seen any evidence, to be honest, but I haven't seen any new evidence. And the evidence that I have seen is quite old. I mean, when you think about the Nixon report and you think about the example of sex trafficking within that, it was, that we're now talking probably 2 years, I guess, since that came out. And it was, from memory, it was a one-off example and it was dealt with at that time, but yet it seems to keep being brought up in rhetoric. So anyway, long story short, Julian Hill, the Assistant Minister, and again, nothing against him. I'm sure, he's acting on the advice that he has before him, but, he was on an online forum and again used chunks, crooks, integrity, sex traffickers, all that sort of language to, I guess, prepare the sector for integrity changes that will undoubtedly come through the ESOS Act. And, I'll be the first person to say, can the ESOS Act be improved? Yeah. But we should be taking stock in the fact that it's a pretty solid governance piece in itself. If you look at where Canada is at the moment, they would have loved to have had an ESOS Act and they would have loved to have had things in place like prisms, things that we take for granted and we probably overlook at times. A lot of other countries don't have those things. So I think the first point that I want to make is that we have a robust governance system anyway. The second bit of that was...
So could I just jump in there, mate?
Yeah, go.
As you're talking, my mind goes back to early 2000s when ESOS was introduced and just how important that has been and how much the sector embraced that. And if we're looking for somebody who's guilty in all of this, it's been a number of the Australian government over 15 or 20 years that haven't done their job. They're agencies that have failed to actually implement the oversight that they've had at their discretion all this time and have failed to do their job. So it's kind of hypocritical for them to turn around and blame the sector when essentially they've been asleep at the wheel. They've had the power.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's probably lots of failures that you could point to over time, notwithstanding that that's the case. The argument's been made that regulators have been underfunded and they've now received extra funding. So I don't want to look over the shoulder too much, in terms of negativity. But as we move forward, I think, the basis point that we start from is really important. And I guess that's the crux of this whole conversation, right? I think the sector, I would like to think we're actually starting from a pretty decent position because we have all these systems in place. We do everything correctly. We now have regulators that are funded appropriately. But yet the narrative and the discussion behind it seems to think that we're starting from the basement. And I personally don't think that's right. It doesn't sit well with me. And that it really came to the fore in an ABC story that was written around childcare. And they went after Southern Cross University, which has a 1-year grad dip in childcare management. And the way that it was written, you would, if someone, if a Martian came from outer space and read that story, you would be absolutely guaranteed to think that the entire sector was in dire straits. And I just thought that's a bit harsh. So there were a few lines in there that I picked up on from ASQA, that quoted ASQA or quoted stats from ASQA. And I thought, you know what? I wonder what the backstory is to that. So, me being me, I thought I'd ask a few questions. And it turns out one of the quotes in there was that, there were, I think, something like 23,000 individuals' qualifications cancelled, 25,000 in total, qualifications that is, for 23,000 individuals across 10 providers. So I literally just asked ASQA, what's the deal with those 10 providers? How many of those are Cricos registered? How does this relate to international education, et cetera, et cetera? Surprise, surprise. The response that came back was 9 out of the 10 that registrations were cancelled weren't even Cricos registered.
Weren't even Cricos
registered. So for those that don't understand Cricos registration, you have to be Cricos registered to deliver to international students. So we're talking about 9 out of the 10 being solely domestic, providing to domestic students. And the one that was Cricos registered, the cancellation had nothing to do with their international cohort. So my assumption, and again, we can talk about this, about the effects on international students, and you can split hairs one or two ways. My assumption on that is that none of those 25,000 qualifications that were cancelled were international student qualifications. But yet, if you read that article, you would be absolutely inclined to believe that the majority of those would have been. Were international students affected? Well, from that one provider who had its registration cancelled, you could assume that there were international students enrolled in those programs. So they would have been affected by the cancellation and they would have had to find other programs or another provider. I assume. There's an assumption in there we don't like to assume, but we'll leave that one open for the moment. What came back in their response was also that they were looking at another 150 providers in more detail, and some of these had to do with fraud and visas and all sorts of things. So they're right across the gamut. Again, I went back to them and asked how many of those are Cricos provided, and the response was in excess of 90. So I'm assuming it's low 90s, otherwise they would have said something else. So I've taken those stats and put them against what ASQA might look at in terms of their overall responsibilities in terms of regulation. And off the top of my head, I think it was 2 and a bit % if you look at the total quantum, including all domestic colleges, and about 9%, 8.9% or 8.8% against Cricos registered programs. Now, again, these are ones that have just got case files open. We don't know whether they're guilty as charged, whether there's serious offences, whether it might just be something else. So again, what I'm trying to say is if you listen to the rhetoric and what is in mainstream media, again, going back to the housing crisis, this is a really big issue we need to tackle. When you scrape the surface, you peel back the contact paper, what actually sits behind it? Certainly in terms of those 10 colleges, there doesn't seem like there's anything behind it from an international education perspective. And when you look at the next 150, there's 90 of those that are Cricos registered. We don't know whether that's the international cohort that they're looking at, whether they're a Cricos only, whether they're domestic. So the story tends to filter down a little bit, or it waters out somewhat. Now, I'm the first person to say, as a sector, we're not squeaky clean. There's no doubt that there are some bad actors out there. And I say continually, our job as a sector, as peers, as regulators, as whatever, is to weed those buggers out, because I tell you, they do us all a disservice. So anyone that is, flagrant, being flagrant towards the rules, who are proven to be doing the wrong things in a serious way, mate, they need to be kicked to the curb. But I don't understand what, and again, we'll come back to that question, why the rhetoric on shonks, crooks and integrity continues to the level that it does when we are seeing more and more that it's not widespread and that it is isolated. That's the kicker. So yeah, mate, it was a really interesting story to work through. It probably, 2 weeks work in total by the time you pull all the information together and you take your time really sifting through it all. But I think a well worth one to put out, because it does hopefully make us think a little bit more differently, or a little bit differently, about what the state of play is and what the political machinations are.
Check that out if you haven't already read it. It's available via LinkedIn or the Koala News.com. Absolutely worth a read. I was really impressed, mate. Obviously, a ton of work that went into that. And maybe that's a nice segue. Actually, before I move on, Julian Hill, I know you're listening. Talk positively about us. It's your bloody job. It defends the industry that's doing so well. Let's move on to something.
Well, Rob, I don't know whether I'm letting the cat out of the bag, but I've been asked to MC or certainly to provide some opening remarks for the Simpled conference, and I'll be introducing Minister Hill. That's going to be an interesting moment.
No pressure, Dirk. No pressure.
None whatsoever.
None.
Let's hope he doesn't clock me over the ear.
Very good, mate.
You can't afford to miss the Australian International Education Conference happening the 14th to 17th October at the National Convention Centre in Canberra. AIE sees the place to meet over 1,500 international education delegates from Australia and overseas. Build your own learning schedule. Gain insights from sector experts, new research findings, and spark ideas at lively discussion sessions. Plus, there's plenty of networking opportunities, from the expo hall to brain dates and social events. Don't miss out. Make sure you're at AIEC 2025. Registration is open now. Learn more at aiec.idp.com.
Let's move on to good news. Talking about international education and Australian institutions, organisations doing an increasingly good job. Like, we've been working hard at this for a very, very long time. But Sydney Welcome Desk has just celebrated 10 years.
Yeah. Mate, it's an amazing achievement, isn't it? You spoke about the AUIDF earlier. I still remember certainly being based in Perth. I think I was at Murdoch at the time. And, welcome desks were, I think Adelaide was the first one from memory to bring in a welcome desk, shortly followed by Melbourne. And it just makes sense having a welcome desk at an airport. When I first saw this story, I wrote to the guys at Study New South Wales and said, can you send me over a quote or something? I'd really like to, put this one up because I think it's a really important thing to acknowledge. And we back and forth a couple of times, and I actually wrote back to them and said, look, I still to this day absolutely remember that when I first went abroad, I would have been 22, 23. Went abroad and those immigration doors from Los Angeles airport opened and a wave of anxiety came over me, and I said to myself, shit, what if that person's not there to meet me? What am I going to do? Having that presence at an airport when people come in. And one of the things that we often forget is, and I say the word reverse culture shock, and I probably shouldn't be reverse culture shock. It's just culture shock. If you come in from, Beijing or Mumbai or something like that, and if you come into maybe not Sydney Airport, maybe Adelaide or Brisbane or Perth at a time where, inbound flights may not be massive, that can be equally as culture shocking coming into an airport where there's not masses of people, there's not lots of commotion, and there's only a few people standing around with a sign, and it might be midnight. And what if somebody's not there to meet you, and where are you staying that night? So we sometimes forget that, and I think it's really, really important to acknowledge good work that we do right across the student journey, and that's a particular point where things can go awry very quickly. So congratulations again to Study New South Wales and to Sydney Airport for the collab, and to all the supporters of that, because there are a whole bunch of institutions that do support Study New South Wales through financially to make that happen. So congratulations to everyone.
Mate, you just referenced your own experience in the USA. For those people who haven't heard that episode where you and I sit down and dig into your backstory, you've got some great yarns in the toolkit there. So folks, go back and listen to the episode with our very own Dirk Mulder. Drop the link in the description. Make sure you listen to it because there's some cracking yarns. And speaking of cracking yarns and people with great stories to tell, you've got another scoop, mate. You keep getting these great people on board. That's what I want to know.
Oh, yeah, look, I'm stoked. But yeah, happy to announce, for the want of a better word, happy to announce Rob Lawrence has come on board with the Koala, and it's fantastic. Man, I've known Rob for a very, very long time. He's a very, very dear friend, and I hold his opinion in the highest regard. So to have Rob on board is just amazing. Yeah, Rob's penned his first piece around, and he's called it T&I. Is this the next generation of T&E? And essentially what he does is talk a little bit about, how T&E evolved and its cross-section with industry, and how industry, over the next 10 years, industry are going to play a much, much larger role in educating people and looking at the changes in which that happens. So, again, 10, 20 years ago, a T&E operation, you could still differentiate yourself in a country with a Western degree, and it was very degree orientated. Now we're looking at companies like Cisco that offer, upskilling opportunities, and we look at at multinational corporations that are moving in and out of places all the time that offer their own qualifications. How that synergy or how that mix will roll out over the next 10 years is something Rob puts a big light on, and he's absolutely bang on, mate. The T&E space, as we knew it, as we probably still know it now and want it to be, because that's what we're familiar with, there's going to be, I don't want to say pressure, but there's going to be dynamics around that will shift the way that works over the next 10 years. For sure.
And it's accelerating, isn't it? I mean, there's no question that the impact of technology, the way that things are moving so quickly in the education space, unis have got a lot to adapt to there. And as you say, these big companies are now essentially doing their own internal learning or collaborating with LinkedIn, LinkedIn platforms. There are a number of big platforms now delivering this kind of like just-in-time education. Yeah, that's...
Well, essentially they're like micro-credentials, right? And how they roll up how do they roll up into more formal things, or are they standalones? Or it's fascinating. And then you look at delivery. I mean, the world it's becoming more and more of a global marketplace just in terms of delivery and online delivery as well. The richness of content that you can get now that you probably couldn't get 10 years ago. And that will continue to develop as well, as you say.
Yeah, ChatGPT study mode. If people haven't heard of it, go and have a look at that, and that will blow your mind. Let's last story for the episode. Interesting talking to end up on AI because as you and I have discussed before, like I believe that the currency of the internet in a decade to come is all about trust. And Simon Emmett from IDP has sort of taken a similar line about trust in international education. Do you want to talk us through this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's great. Firstly, it's great to have Simon writing. It's from an IDP perspective, I'm obviously one of the largest global centres of students over the last 10 years, and continue to be, which is great. Yeah, so Simon, he starts off probably by talking about some of the changes that we've seen over the last little bit. And I really love, I'm going to read it because Rob, for those of you that don't know, we put together just a little bit of an outline of a run sheet. I put this particular quote in there because I think it sums up exactly where we are. I think we will oscillate over time between, like you say, digital delivery and other things, but trust. How do you trust? And that's a really big thing. So he says, the pressures on our sector, including policy shifts, geopolitical uncertainty, and the changing student expectations are not going away. The organisations that will thrive are those that treat trust as their most valuable currency and can prove it. I think that's really important, that last bit. The future of international education will not be judged solely by the number of students we enrol, but how well those students succeed in their studies, their careers, and their lives. Trust is the foundation for that success. And I think, mate, if you put that quote in a frame and you stuck it in every international office around the country, and not just every international office, but every institution, it's a pretty bloody good motto to go by, or a pretty good mission. Not just how we enrol those students, but how they succeed in their studies, their careers, and their lives. And I think such a powerful statement, and he's bang on.
There you go. That's one for Unis Australia. The next information campaign, trying to shift public opinion, public sentiment, because that's it, isn't it? I mean, in a world where you can literally get anything, any sort of information, in a fraction of a second in your hands delivered by AI, can you trust that? No. I mean, we know that you can't. Can you trust a university program? Bloody oath you can. Like, there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes, not only inside institutions, but from the Australian Qualifications Framework, the AQF, all the way down to make sure that you can trust that. So that's absolutely the message, I think, that we need to be talking more about with the public.
Agreed wholeheartedly.
How's that for coming back whole circle, mate?
Mate, I think we've done well.
We're not shocked.
A very well curated podcast.
Well, mate, it's been great chatting as always. And for those people listening along, you know where to go and get your news. It's thekoalanews.com. And, AIEC drawing closer, Dirk. You getting excited already?
Mate, absolutely. I shouldn't say this because I'm actually looking forward to Canberra. I know a lot of people, overlook Canberra as a destination, but I went to high school down near there and I always really enjoy going back. And Canberra's got some real hidey holes that, if you know where to look, Canberra can be a great place. So, my recommendation for anyone going to AIC is try and tag onto somebody who understands Canberra and knows where those little hidey holes, the nooks, the crannies are. Get out of the civic area and actually experience some of Canberra, outside, because it's a wonderful city. Looking forward to it.
Start booking your dinner dates is what I'm going to say. Make sure you book in your restaurants because they will book up.
Yeah,
fast.
That's a good point. Yeah, true.
Awesome, mate. Well, I'll see you in the next news episode. And I think we're going to have maybe Louise Gould from the conference committee back with us, giving us the all-important rundown on the conference dinner theme. I'm only mildly obsessed.
I'm hearing the Indiana Jones music replay from last year already.
Very good now. And for those people listening along, hang around. We've got some feedback from some people from the Learning Abroad Forum recorded live insights, some of the key things that they learnt there. And we'll see you next time. Good to chat, Dirk.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob.
And for everyone for participating, asking questions, going on with the surveys, etc. It's been a really great day, some really great highlights from some fantastic speakers, starting off with a very powerful opening where I learned how hard it was to say utilitarianism. And as we've called this data day, it did end up turning into a data day, and what a fantastic data day it was. I certainly learnt a lot. We had some really great split inbound and outbound sessions as well, so it was really good to see inbound get some love. And thank you, everyone.
Well, I'm here with Jack, an old colleague who's just come up and said, we met here 12 years ago. It's great to see you again, Jack.
Oh, you too.
What's been the highlight for you from today?
I think the keynote was really great, kind of really thought-provoking, and keeps people talking about the topics raised for the whole day. So a really good conversation starter and a whole kind of really collegial atmosphere.
In the keynote, the presenter, she was really, it was an intense keynote, but so thought-provoking. And she was talking about how her grandfather was in Germany during the sort of Nazi days and was one of the key architects of the book burnings. And yet now she's here in like knowledge generation and things like that. It was such a powerful moment for her to talk there and have a photo of her grandfather up there. Maybe that's too heavy for a podcast. I don't know. We've been talking about it all day.
Well, this and a lot of other themes that came up in our keynote speech. Yeah, it was really great.
What really stood out to you then? What else stood out to you? To me, it was just that image, the image of her grandfather.
Well, she made the connections between that time and what's happening in the US at the moment and kind of made some comparison contrasts. Yeah. So it was really interesting. And I remember there was a moment I got quite teary. Actually, a couple of times. I know there was.
Data anymore. I'm actually going to say is being able to connect in with all of you, which I've probably stolen this now because they're frantically scrambling. Yeah, because I must admit it's lovely to see all the people I already knew and just reconnect with you all, but also to meet a whole bunch of new people who are new to the sector, which is really fantastic. Every year we see all these new faces. And I started in 2010. I think I went to my first AIEC conference, and as Simon Davies Burrows, who's not here today, he convinced me to go on the Ferris wheel, even though at Lima Park, even though I have a fear of heights. Don't worry, old people go on it. It's fine. It was not fine. I did break down and scream, "Get the ep off! Give me the ep off!" Yeah. So that's my enduring memory of working and learning abroad. But yeah, it's lovely to meet all of you and to spend time with you and hear all your ideas and thoughts. Just share problems, but also share these wonderful success stories. So I'll hand over to Simon for the next highlight.
That was my idea, but I think my highlight is to be impressed by what a smart bunch of people we all are. I'm endlessly impressed by how much you all think, innovate, work strategically, and are able to respond to all the challenges thrown at us in a positive way, when many people might have just given up and got another job. And with specific things with relevancy bias, because I don't remember what happened yesterday. The Unigo session, just like awesome. How to work with Gen Z, I think something we're all a little challenged by. Liam's inspiration for us to go further in the government, to go further in supporting what we do. Getting engineers abroad, working in partnership with everyone, and data, of course, is important. I think my highlight actually is to be so impressed by everyone and to feel reinvigorated, to go back and face some challenges in my own institution, as I'm sure you all are, with the energy and the appreciation of all the work that everyone does. Thank you.
Yeah, to sum it up, I couldn't agree more. I think it's really the collegiality. You are showing up to tell us what you think are doing great or reasonably well, or you think you're a little bit good at, and you think it's worth sharing with all of us. No one has an ego, and if they did, they wouldn't come. So you want us to be better practitioners. You want us to learn from you. You say, I'm already doing it. I will show you how you can do it too. And it doesn't require all the money in the world sometimes. It doesn't always require the biggest teams in the world, because we know we have none of those two things. And so really the friendship and the collegiality and the compassion and the kindness and the friendships and the relationships that we are building together. I can also get a little bit emotional about this. And reflecting that I am the best practice. From 20 years ago, I was a study abroad student at Macquarie University. I've mentioned this before. Shout out again to Macquarie. So I'm a result of all of what you guys are doing. Yes, the other way around. I came from Germany to Australia, but I am now living in a second country. I've lived here for almost 15 years now, and I'm living and breathing now what you're all living and breathing. So don't ever stop doing what you're doing. Don't ever stop believing that what you're doing is worthwhile. We've wrapped up with a fabulous session, with a beautiful video. Yeah. Oh, I can't thank you enough. What a beautiful 2 days, and thank you all. So you get to start. That's better. Yeah. You got set there. Yeah.
Don't get us started on karaoke. You know I'll do that. Okay. So finally, our IEAA community service announcements. Like to mention the IEAA fellowship program. I've done this. I'm a CD fellow. I think Simon is also, and Jeanette, I think, might also be. Really worthwhile doing. So I would encourage you to do it. And I'm always happy to share like how I put together my experience in the field. I started as an associate fellow and have moved on up. So, yeah, really worthwhile. If you want to know more about this prestigious recognition for professionals in the international education field, you can ask us. Fellows are seen as leaders, innovators and influencers with dedication and experience in international education. And you can have a look at the IEAA website for a bit more info. Elizabeth is also holding a Friday lunchtime drop-in sessions if you have any questions, or you can ask us about. So always happy to answer those questions. There are some upcoming professional development activities the IEAA has got coming up that are listed on the screen. So head to the website for more information. If you're interested in research or data, I know a lot of people are interested in that. We have different groups that you might want to learn more about or join in their upcoming webinars as well. We've got the Erasmus Plus Cluster Meeting and Contact Making Seminar for Asia, the Pacific and Middle East, which will be held in Sri Lanka on the 18th to 19th of November this year. If you're keen to attend in person, registration closes on the 17th of October. If you're participating virtually, please register by the 11th of November 2025. This year's event will address the role of education in green transition. The cluster meeting will give opportunities to showcase successful Erasmus Plus mobility and cooperation projects, linking European, Asian, Middle Eastern and Pacific education institutions and focusing on the transversal program priority, environment and fight against climate change. We encourage you to register also for AIEC conference, which is taking place in Canberra, lovely Canberra, from 14th to the 17th of October. Hopefully I'll see you there. Early bird registrations close the 12th of September. Registration fees increase after this date, so make sure you register now. And a friendly reminder that IEAA members receive discounted rates. Some really fantastic sessions dedicated to learning abroad. So I hope I see many of you there. There's going to be a campfire session run by me and a range of other sessions. So please have a look at the conference program.
Well, it's appropriate being in Tasmania to be talking about sustainability because this is like the home of sustainability. And I've grabbed Ilse Lamont, who is the CEO, Managing Director, General Legend of International Education, and boss of the IESG, the International Education Sustainability Group. And you presented some interesting stuff today at the Learning Abroad Forum, but what do we need to do more of, Elsa, when it comes to sustainability, climate action and all that?
The main thing people need to do is really start factoring it into decision making. So, it's really tempting. I totally understand the desire to sometimes look away because it can be quite challenging, but actually once you start looking at it, there's so many really practical things that you can do, especially in the field of learning abroad, whether that's just putting it in your strategy, talking to your sustainability team, putting climate content into pre-departures or orientations. Learning abroad is probably the field of international education that has the most reach and the most opportunity to really have a direct impact in this field.
What I was wondering while you were presenting was, is climate action and what the work you kind of do around, being part of strategy and learning abroad, is that taken into account by, for example, Times Higher Ed when they do the sustainability rankings and things like that?
It isn't yet, although we have been talking to them about doing it. You might know that just last year the QS sustainability ranking recognised being a signatory of the CANI Accord, which is fabulous. And it was the first time that any of the major rankings have really recognised that kind of climate action in international education. Actually taking part in our climate action barometer, if you like, can be more impactful even than being a signatory to the CANI Accord. So we think it should be recognised, but it's not yet. Watch this space.
Yeah, I reckon it absolutely should be, because then I'm just thinking about those organisations, right, that are really focusing in on that, and there's a bunch of them now that are taking it seriously. And I'm like, oh, if it was in that, then that would really drive meaningful action on all sorts of levels.
It would be fantastic. I think, we do ask people what are their challenges, what are their barriers when it comes to actually taking climate action within an international team. Very often it's not knowing what other people are doing, not having the time or resources to actually work out themselves what can be done, and just not knowing, whether what you're doing is good and if it's in line with global practice. So that's what the CAB was really developed for, to help people as a first step.
Thanks, Elsa.
You're welcome. Lovely to see you, Rob.
I'm here with Brad Doherty, CEO and founder of CIS Australia. Hey, Brad, before I ask you about the results, mate, can you tell me a little bit about this survey work that you've been now doing for a number of years?
Yeah, sure. So the Learning Abroad survey came out of COVID in 2020. We're now in our 8th edition.
One of the good things to come out of COVID.
Well, one of the only good things to come out of COVID. But been very well received. At the time when we released it, it was about really getting data intelligence that was real time, as opposed to sort of data that's a year or two old. And being able to ask a collective group of 36 or 37 universities normally, so well over 90% year-on-year response rate, which is wonderful, gives that data great integrity. And what we've found is that real-time data allows universities to make more accurate decisions in terms of their planning, their staffing, their marketing, their recruitment, country trends, programming trends. And so the survey's really found its place now in its eighth iteration.
You presented some interesting data today, and you guys have been doing fantastic longitudinal research in the learning abroad space for many years now. What are some of the key things that you found?
Rob, I think there's some pros and cons, or some positives and negatives come out of the last data set. I think there's some really good data around reduction in barriers to things like engagement with academic staff. That was a real positive. Clearly, institutions are marketing more proactively on campus, so that the marketing and the recruitment is cutting through on campus, which is a real positive. Engagement and uptake by academics is probably the most important, getting those champions back, which we lost in COVID. And so there's some real, I can't remember all of the data points, but there's some real positive data points there. Probably some of the weaknesses, areas of really key areas we need to improve on are getting learning abroad back into our university's overarching strategic plans. That's probably the biggest point and the biggest takeaway for institutions at the moment, because there's been a significant shift away from that in the last 12 months, and we know the importance of having learning abroad within those strategic plans.
One of the things that I took away, Brad, was, you kind of do this forward horizon scanning kind of work with practitioners, looking at asking them, where they think students are going to be going, how many students they think are going to be going out. And I thought it was curious that, you kind of go back in time and look what people said last year and how things unfolded here in the present. And in fact, quite a conservative estimates from the crowd here at the forum. And actually, I was quite surprised that people were still quite conservative in their views about how learning abroad will continue to rebound post-COVID.
I think there has been a conservative approach, and my take on that, I mean, I'm not 100%, but my current take on that is that I think the estimates of, what people are predicting for learning abroad going forward in 2025 and 2026 is based around the uncertainty of the NCP scholarship program, which has been a really big part of our landscape over the last, 10 plus years. And so that's going through a fairly significant change process at the moment. And so, the focus for NCP is not so much volume anymore. It's more, less students doing extended programs abroad, as opposed to sort of shorter term group programs and larger volume. So I think everyone's a little bit apprehensive about where that will lead in terms of their numbers. And I think there's certainly a fair amount of confidence that the volume of students going to Asia and the Pacific, based on the data, is going to reduce. And that without this sort of funding mechanism to Asia and the Pacific, which has probably artificially inflated numbers there for many years, I think we're seeing now, an increased volume of students heading back to Europe in particular.
Anything else that really kind of jumped out of you when you kind of went through those results? There's so much good data. And of course, CIS Australia extremely generous with that knowledge. You can find that on CIS's webpage, cisaustralia.com.au, in the industry engagement section, off the top of my head. Sound right?
Yeah, industry research pages.
There we go.
Yep. So, look, I think what are some of the other data points? I think there's, some key environmental sort of discussions that need to be had from institutions around, their social obligation here in terms of learning abroad is really important, but only about 50% of the universities in Australia actually have an environmental policy connected to learning abroad and lowering the impact of, admissions and the environmental impact of travel. So I think that's one thing that, is a real focus area. I think the other thing is learning abroad officers engaging more closely with domestic recruitment officers, because there's a real benefit there in terms of, getting more Australian students into Australian universities. So using learning abroad as a recruitment tool.
Yeah.
Because Australian high school students really want to be able to know that they can have a learning abroad experience, be it short term, be it 12 months, be it semester, be it volunteering, be it internship, be it short term study. The multitude, they want to have that choice. Even if they don't take it up, it's an attraction to taking part in an institutional degree. So I think that's a really important place. And the other thing is, if learning abroad officers are engaging with domestic recruitment officers, it makes it easier to plant the seed that learning abroad, should be an expectation for students. So it plants it at the year 11 to 12 sort of mark rather than planting it in year 1, because we only have a 3-year degree in Australia. So you better off planning it in year 11 and 12 than planning it in year 1 when students, we have to really rush this process and feel a bit, rushed about the whole thing. Rather than planning it in year 11 and 12, it's an easier task.
Mate, love the work you do. And thanks for your generous insights as always, man.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure, Rob. Thanks, mate.
I've grabbed Emily O'Callaghan, friend of the podcast, and if you're a long-time listener, you may have heard the episode with Emily, which was just hilarious. We had such a good chat.
It did. We did.
Now, Emily, you've just released some of the first preliminary results from Mix Abroad.
Yes.
There's some interesting insights there.
Very interesting. It's been super exciting watching the data come in, and I think a bit hard to stay away from it, to be honest, particularly the qualitative, like with AI these days. It's nice to just plug that in and find the most impactful quotes from students. And yeah, I have been known to do that and get a bit emotional over some of the things the students are saying. But no, it's been really great. One, unpacking it today at the IEAA Learning Abroad Forum, but we've also sent out our initial findings and reports to the partners as well, so they've been able to see their results comparatively versus the other Australian institutions that are our partners, and also globally too.
Can you give the listeners a little bit of a taste of what you've created with Mix Abroad, the sort of work that you're doing, and just perfectly timed question as Emily was sipping on her beer here at the networking drinks.
Anyway, so Mix Abroad, it's basically a global benchmark measuring impact and experience for internationalisation at home and also, obviously, learning abroad. So it's across virtual programs, in person, and also work and study. In terms of what we're, reporting on for institutions, it's across that whole student journey. So really, helping them, understand, where students are having a bit of difficulty in terms of their pre-departure, where they might have needed more support, where there's opportunities to improve for institutions, all the way through to in-program and experiences with the host institution, if there was a host, and then upon return. I think the most important piece for us is the reflective piece. So it is an assessment. So when they return from the experience, they do the Mixed Abroad survey, and part of it is actually at 20 plus questions, just looking at how they found it impacted them. It might be in terms of, them and their feeling of self or understanding of self, resilience, career readiness, problem-solving skills, all these things that we are trying to support students in achieving through these programs, but getting the students to, one, think about that and reflect on that from their own perspective post-experience, and then actually looking at how that may differ for different student cohort types or different program types as well.
The stat that really jumped out at me when you were presenting was the one about culture shock and multiple experiences abroad. Do you want to unpack that for listeners?
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely, as I said, with the initial insights, we've got 3,300 students that have responded so far. But we started seeing this trend in terms of what we would have thought would be that students that hadn't been abroad would have experienced culture shock a little bit more, that they're not used to that experience. What we did actually find when we actually really dove into the data was that more countries students had been to, actually the culture shock, it existed for longer for those students. We haven't actually unpacked it, and I was talking a little bit today at the forum about maybe unpacking it by the age of those students as well. When did they actually undertake these experiences? How old were they when they were going to these countries? Maybe they were going with their parents, or so they had support networks there. But really understanding, why is that? Why exactly? Like you said, I just assumed that these students would have an easier time if they'd already travelled before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it kind of jumped out at me. I was like, is it complacency? Is it because they travelled when they were young? Either way, I think the interesting thing about these longitudinal surveys, and the good thing for institutions who are involved, is that you get to ask those questions over time and get more and more detailed insights. So yeah, very interesting what you guys are working on.
That's super interesting. Yeah, we're looking forward to unpacking a bit more, and we'll have to have another catch up soon, right?
Sounds good. Thanks, Em.
Take care. See you.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address, and that way you will never miss out on all of the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garigal land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora, and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.